Okay, we're ready.
Hi.
Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, well, I think we can go ahead and get started. We actually have quite a few people in the audience ready to rock and roll today. So I wanted to welcome everybody to our BIRCWH Leadership Webinar for June here at Emory University. We are so excited about today's talk as sex as a biological variable with Dr. Clayton. My name is Kelly Stidham Hall, and I am faculty here in the School of Public Health as well as on our BIRCWH steering committee and executive committee, and I'm a former BIRCWH myself, so I am a big cheerleader of the program and so excited to be here today with you all. I would like to first introduce one of our Emory BIRCWH scholars who will serve as the moderator for today's panel, Dr. Vas Machopoulos. She's I think from our perspective, an exemplary BIRCWH scholar, and really happy and excited about this opportunity to be working with you today, Dr. Clayton. So I will hand it over to Vas.
Thank you, Kelly, for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're truly honored to have Dr. Janine Clayton joining us today from the Office of Research on Women's Health at the NIH. She is the director of that very critical office and has been really central in, her entire career, really pushing women's health issues to the forefront. And more recently, she really was the architect for this sex as a biological variable policy that was instituted by the NIH. And with that, Dr. Clayton, thank you again for joining us. Should I turn it over to you? I know you've got some slides that you have prepared for us.
Actually, can you introduce the other two young ladies that I see on the screen?
Oh yeah, so Kayla, you guys want to introduce yourselves real quickly?
Hi, I'm Kayla Smith. I'm kind of the interim Emory BIRCWH coordinator with Dr. Ofodekin. And this beside me is Clarissa Hood. She is one of our summer interns. So she's helped me kind of set up the webinar as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
And so everyone, during the course of this presentation and discussion, you will see that there's abilities for you all to actually ask questions live through the chat box function down at Zoom, and I'll be monitoring those. So again, if you have any questions about what Dr. Clayton is presenting, please let me know. I also want to thank everyone for the questions that they actually submitted with the registration. So whenever I get an opportunity, I'm going to, in the context of what is being presented, I'm going to try and ask those questions for everybody. All right, so with that, Dr. Clayton, take us away.
Okay. Alrighty, so here we go. All right, are you guys seeing the screen okay? Hello?
I think so.
Okay.
Yes, it looks great.
Great, awesome. Okay, well, I'm really excited to be here. Thanks again for inviting me to present at the BIRCWH Webinar Series. I was asked to divide this talk into three major sections: a little bit about my background, historical perspective on sex and gender, and actually SABV. So, okay, here we go. I think it is working, Kelly. So here's my outline. I'm going to talk a little bit about women in biomedical careers generally, and then we'll go into more SABV. And the way that I'd like to initiate that is by acknowledging Dr. Vivian Pinn, the first full-time director of the office. She launched the BIRCWH, and the Vivian Pinn Symposium is now being held annually in her honor. And I know many of you know Dr. Pinn, so I'd like to begin my talk with that. I'd also like to highlight that this past year's Vivian Pinn Symposium was entitled Catalytic Connections, Leveraging the Network to Advance Women in Science. And I encourage you to take a look at the video cast for the Vivian Pinn Symposium. Is highlighting all these career issues, and it is available on the NIH Videocast website. And I, again, would also like to have you look at womeninscience.nih.gov, the website for the NIH Working Group on Women in Biomedical Careers that I co-chair with Dr. Collins. So please take a look at that as well. But you did ask me to talk a little bit about how I ended up at NIH, what were my main challenges at the beginning, and whether I anticipated leadership roles. And so my main mentor, I'm going to talk about mentor's journey from ophthalmology and to women's health research, challenges, and leadership based on those questions. And I like to begin my talk with this because this is my first mentor. This is my mom. This is my daughter, Chelsea. This is my husband, Robert. These are my parents here. This is my support system, and there's absolutely no way I would be able to do any of the things I'm doing without them. They don't know I have these pictures in here, so please don't tell them if you know them, because they'd be embarrassed. But my first mentor is my mom, and I've had so many mentors. Dr. Pinn here, Dr. LaSalle Lafall, the first African-American president of the American Cancer Society, taught me in medical school. It is his motto that is equanimity under duress, being able to be placid and calm under duress. And that really helped me as a medical student, as a surgeon, as a person. It's been something that's really helped me. And he's a mentor that I really want to identify. This is Dr. Robert Newsonblatt, who was my mentor at the National Eye Institute Laboratory of Immunology. He recently passed away, but I'm still having impact from his mentorship. In fact, it was his entree that recently got me the invitation to write a review paper on dry eye in the New England Journal of Medicine that recently came out. So I want to acknowledge them first. But you all asked me what got me into women's health research. Now that you know I'm an ophthalmologist, this is what got me interested in sex and gender and women's health. And there was a meta-analysis performed many years ago that looked worldwide, all across the world, at visually impaired or blind people, and 2/3 of those are women, including in the United States and high-income countries. That was very disturbing to me. I hadn't learned it in medical school. I hadn't learned it in my residency. 2/3 of blind people being women without an adequate explanation is a problem. And you can see here for some specific conditions, glaucoma, for example, cataract, all of them, they're much more common in women than men. Here's the summary, 66%. Women do live longer than men do, and that is a risk factor for some of these, but not all of these. The fact that we could not explain this is what got me interested in women's health. And so I transitioned to women's health, and we can talk more about that if you want. But I'm really pleased to see that today we're having some changes in terms of leadership and what we see in who is giving commencement talks. For the first time, the majority of the nation's 25 schools, these are a particular set of schools, with the largest endowments had women as commencement speakers. So we're seeing some progress, but we know there's a lot more work to be done in this space. In fact, this group called Gender Avenger, and I have no proprietary interest in this, and I'm certainly and just highlighting it as one example of an entity that is highlighting putting a spotlight on the fact that we need to have more women speakers, we need to have more women on panels, we need to have fewer of these all-male panels called Manels. And this Gender Avenger is an app you can put on your phone, and you can just count the number of women speaking at an event and just put that information out there. So here's one way that, one really creative way that people are getting the word out, because we do know that gender diversity leads to better science. But I like to also highlight this PNAS paper that recently came out that highlights gender diversity as an innovation dividend. And it's not just adding more women in STIR. That's not the approach that really leads to better science. You need all of these other features here: a positive climate, engaging managers. You need to have diversified research methods. You need to have a non-hierarchical structure, which I would say is the antithesis of how academia is currently organized. And there needs to be a critical mass. All of these things need to work together in the context of a positive environment, so that when you have diversity, you can drive discovery. But it is all of those factors together. And so we like to look at sex and gender intersection with race, ethnicity, and age as kind of our organizing framework for a multidimensional perspective at looking at the health of women. And I'm just highlighting that as kind of a slide that's you'll see in separating each of these sections. And so in terms of the second area that you asked me to talk about, historical perspective on sex and gender science and women's health research and how far we've come, what motivated the establishment of ORWH by NIH? In 1990, the Office of Research Women's Health was not established. In fact, women were not routinely included in NIH-supported clinical research. And research findings from men were applied to women. It is that recognition that really wasn't the best thing for women, or for men for that matter, that led to women in Congress and the Women's Caucus and others calling for NIH to establish the Office of Research on Women's Health. On the left here, you see Dr. Ruth Kirstein. The late Dr. Kirstein is the first woman director of an institute at NIH, and she was also acting NIH director and integral in the formation of this office. Senator Mikulski from the great state of Maryland, Dr. Bernadine Healy, the only woman official NIH director, and Dr. Vivian Pinn. And so the office was established to address that lack of inclusion of women in clinical research, to promote and expand women's health research, and to address women advancing in biomedical careers. And so what do we mean by these terms, sex and gender gender science? Clearly, I think we're all on the same page with what constitutes sex being a biological variable classified and derived from a chromosomal complement, certainly beginning in utero at fertilization, actually affecting health from a wide variety of perspectives and expressed in every single cell in a person or animal's body. Gender is a much more complicated concept. It's a multidimensional psychosocial construct, and that involves roles, behaviors, expectations, expressions, dynamics, influences, and gender identity. All of those are aspects of gender, and you can see that it's incredibly multi-layered and much more complicated than being XX or XY or intersex, as sex has only a few options. Gender, there are really quite many, and it's also context specific. And so unfortunately in the US, we don't have agreed upon a definition of gender. Our neighbors to the north, Canada, have adopted a definition that is very, very good. But these are just the terms so that we're on the same page. What's going on there? Maybe you can advance for me there. Yeah, went off the side here. Okay, right click, okay. There we go, thanks. And so we know that these terms are not the same, they're different, but they are interrelated. They're inextricably related in terms of health, and they certainly affect us in many different ways. There might be a reason why you would respond differently to a medication, for example, based on the fact that you're XX or XY. Most recent example is Ambien, which is cleared more slowly in women than in men. And that's resulted in the FDA recommending a specific dosage for women of 5 milligrams, as opposed to the dosage recommended for men, which is 10 milligrams, because this drug is cleared more slowly from women in the morning when they have taken this sleep aid the night before. The drug is still at a level in their bodies that can be assessed to slow reaction time on driving simulations. So certainly that is a really important and relevant metric. And we talked about gender affecting other attitudes, the likelihood that somebody might appear to seek care. There are a lot of ways that gender might affect care, and I won't go into details unless you all want to talk more about that. In terms of asking about what we see in the state of sex and gender science, our existing 6 goals of the strategic plan, A Vision for 2020, incorporate these 6 goals that you can see here, ranging from increasing sex differences research in basic science to employing innovative strategies to build a well-trained, diverse, and vigorous sex gender-based health research workforce. I want to highlight goal number 3 here, actualize personalized prevention, diagnostics, and therapeutics. As many of you know, many of the diagnostic strategies that we employ are really based on a model of disease that is more prevalent in men. For example, coronary angiography is designed to detect, large vessel blockages and narrowing, and the pattern of disease, microvascular disease, and is that you see in women at times is not as readily detectable on coronary angiography, So the gold standard for detecting coronary artery disease is based on a male predominant pattern of disease. And so goal 3 would be actualizing diagnostics that are appropriate for both men and women, and understanding how our diagnostic tools, therapeutics, work in men and women. And our 3rd section, and I don't know if you want me to pause here for questions in the first 2 sections, Vass, or if you want to wait for this section. Do you want to? We're going to.
Let's go ahead and see. Does anyone from the audience have any questions about Dr. Clayton's, career trajectory? I know there's some questions that were specific about being junior faculty and getting to where you were. For instance, we had one participant that wanted to wanted you to address whether there was anything that you knew now that you wish you had known when you were early stage that would have changed or helped you in any way.
Sure. I certainly, I think that if I had known that there are many paths to getting to leadership and getting to advance, I might have put less pressure on myself. I think that we all are kind of presented with this one pathway of, get a tenure track position, become tenured, get leadership positions and ascend. And, for many of us, that path is not that straightforward. In fact, my path is certainly not straightforward. I got pregnant my first year of medical school at Harvard Medical School and had to leave for a medical leave of absence, and decided I really could not go back to Boston with a baby and no family, and ended up transferring to Howard University College of Medicine, where I finished, and that was not my plan. And I really also, during that transition period, I didn't really think that I could finish medical school. It's really a tough time for me. So if I had maybe had more people who told stories like that, I might have realized that, well, it's not the end of the world. You can do this in a different way. It doesn't have to be a linear path. So that's one thing I think it's important for us to share experiences that we've had, because I think it's easy to look at people and think that it's just been a straightforward path and not necessarily realize that people get to their opportunities and trajectories in very many different ways.
Thank you so much for sharing that really personal experience. Yeah, there aren't, but there's more than one pathway to get to certain places. And even now, kind of coming up in the ranks myself, I'm starting to see there's a lot of variability, and that, discussing these things in open manner really is helpful for all, women and all early stage investigators. And just one more question on the career stuff, and then I think we'll get forward, because I haven't gotten any questions from the live audience, is are there any pitfalls or things for early stage investigators to be aware of during this time in their career?
So pitfalls in the early stage investigator position, I think one of the pitfalls is being asked to be on a lot of committees and do a lot of things that aren't necessarily as directly related to your research and you advancing. In that particular early stage where you are trying to launch a career and develop a research area, get known for a particular aspect of your research, forge your own role distinct from your mentor, it's really important that you're able to focus. And so, committees and other things that we're all asked to do, I think you need to choose wisely. I'm not saying you shouldn't do any of them, but I do think you need to choose wisely. And I think the other kind of pearl I would say is, many of us as women, we're often eager to help, and if somebody asks us to do something or assist them, we'll frequently say yes before we know all the details. And so it's really important to say, let me think about that, or ask the right questions up front. What are you specifically asking? How much time will it take? What's the time frame for it? And then if you can't do it or decide that you shouldn't do it, immediately give them a name of another woman. So this is a strategy that will allow you to say, I can't do that at this time, but so-and-so at Emory is really good in that area, and I really think you should consider her. Here's her CV. Would you like me to get her permission to introduce you guys by email? So that's one kind of pitfall, which is, saying yes to too many things that are at that time you have to focus so that you can launch.
All right, thank you for that. And just, I have, monthly check-ins with my mentors here, and I have heard people say that exact thing to me. Yeah, out of 3 people in the last couple of months, 2 have said exactly that, and 1 has said you need to be doing more service. So thank you for that. All right, so I guess we'll kind of put a hold on those questions and then circle back to it if we have time at the end. But I think now, please go ahead and launch into the discussion about sex as a biological variable, and hopefully this will garner some live questions and interaction with the audience.
Okay. Great, thank you. So sex is a biological variable, SABV, is the new policy that you heard about in the introduction. And the background in terms of why it's important to study SABV, clearly, to build a knowledge base that better informs the design of clinical research and clinical trials in humans that come in these two, karyotypes of XX and XY, ultimately to deliver better and more personalized care to each men and women, and to avoid mistakes by not considering sex as a biological variable. And I'll give you the example of what I call toxicity surprises, or drug recalls that happen because of greater risks and adverse events in women. And we know that women have more AEs than do men with virtually any medication, but also in terms of drug withdrawal. And I'll give you one specific one and a personal one, since I'm talking in the family here. So terfenadine or Seldane is one of the antihistamines that was withdrawn from the market because it prolongs the QT interval, and because women already have a slightly longer QT interval than do men normally. If you prolong it, you are more likely to trigger torsades and other arrhythmias in women than in men. Both women and men get this. Seldane or terfenadine is an antihistamine that I used to take every day. And so in particular, that's one that, that I highlight. So why, what are some of the factors that are associated with this, the need for an SABV policy? Well, we had a situation with, by convention, we had an over-reliance on male animals, and that's a problem. If you look at different disciplines here, citing 6 fields showing that they relied on rodents in 80% or more of these animal studies, and in the rodents, they were emphasizing male rodents in 8 of these 10. And you can see the ratio of male to female here, and you can see that neuroscience in this particular study was one of the most biased. And so that's clearly a problem. And so what about our rationale for getting here, and the notion that we believe studying both sexes, males and females, contributes to rigor and reproducibility? So first, we had this over-reliance on male animals and cells, which I mentioned. Even in vitro work, male cells are preferred. There's a lack of transparency about what sex are the animals and subjects of your research. So even when males and females are used, they're not always reported. The sex of the subjects isn't always reported. And there's an overall inattention to the effects of sex as a biological variable. That is combined with an inconsistent reporting of sex-specific findings. It's very difficult to find publications that disaggregate their data by sex, even for the primary outcome, that show blood pressure change in male and female animals of this hypertension model or whatever model that you're studying. And as a result of that, we've got an incomplete knowledge base. We know more about male biology than we do about female biology. We've run the risk of making erroneous conclusions where we kept males and females together inappropriately in our analysis. The results may not be reproducible. And clearly, if you don't tell somebody how many males and females you used, did you use a male and female, there's nobody that can reproduce your work. Toxicity surprises, as I mentioned, this approach does not maximize the return on investment of public funded research, and certainly runs the risk of eroding public trust. When you cannot reproduce studies, it really is a problem beyond just science. And here's a quote from Roth and Cox: "Science isn't science if it isn't reproducible." So NIH embarked upon an initiative to enhance reproducibility through rigor and transparency. And here are the key elements of that initiative. These are the changes that were made 2 years ago. First, investigators and applicants had to provide the scientific premise for an application. Then they had to discuss the rigor in their application, which is, NIH defines rigor as the strict application of the scientific method to ensure robust and unbiased experimental design, methodology, analyses, reporting, and interpretation and reporting of results. And clearly, if you only have male animals, you are biased in terms of experimental design from the beginning. So therefore, the experiment is less rigorous using the NIH definition. Biological variables was the third element of the Enhancing Reproducibility Initiative, and relevant biological variables such as sex, age, weight, and underlying health conditions, were added, as well as, and all 3 of these are required as part of the application itself, and including the research strategy section. Authentication is a separate entity, and that goes in a separate form, and that was also part of the Enhancing Reproducibility to Rigor and Transparency Initiative. In addition, sex as a biological variable is important, so important that it also had its own separate guide notice and separate policy statement. And here it is in a nutshell. NIH expects that sex as a biological variable will be factored into research designs, analyses, and reporting in vertebrate, animal, and human studies. And here's the guide notice. And I want to call your attention to also the fact that there is a document that you can get to from the guide notice that is a PDF that goes into more detail about the SABV policy. I also want to let you know that we had our first NIH SABV workshop in October of last year, where we talked about these issues, and the video cast of that is available at the website here. That workshop was held in collaboration with the NIH Common Fund. And so we believe that sex as a biological variable is an integrating approach that investigators can use across the entire biomedical research continuum, and that by using this perspective, you can link together the parts of this continuum more effectively. What do I mean by that? So the NIH tagline is turning discovery into health. And in the discovery space, you have what we call basic research, which might just really be phenomenology type of research where you're observing and reporting findings. They may be at a cellular or subcellular level, and we really don't know a lot about any sex influences there. Basic research, you're starting to move into animals, and we're starting to think about whether there might be some clinical relevance of those findings in addition to characterizing biology, physiology, pathophysiology. And so as we move into the preclinical research space, where you are declaring your work is preclinical, going into the clinic, modeling a human disease, that's what preclinical research is. Here you absolutely must consider sex as a biological variable. And in animal models, that's important. In the translational space, you're trying to go into humans. We believe you must study both sexes, not just include both sexes, study, characterize both sexes as you move from basic to applied research. In the clinical space, you're studying both sexes, and you're also examining sex and gender differences as you're testing in men and women to see if your treatments are effective and safe in men and women. In the healthcare delivery space, you're trying to deliver the appropriate treatments. And in the population health context, we want you to deploy sex and gender informed care practices and policies in the appropriate treatment context. And clearly reporting results in a sex disaggregated way and interpreting results through a lens of sex and gender is essential throughout this entire continuum. And so here's an example funded by the Office of Research on Women's Health, Sex and Gender Administrative Supplements. Here's a preclinical example. The Office of Research Infrastructure Programs, or ORIP, had a parent grant that was Rat Resource and Research Center, and they were able to get funded on a supplement to look at the role of the gut microbiome in sex differences and Alzheimer's disease using these rat models that they were investigating. And here's a very timely NIDA example. The parent grant was looking at behavioral treatment developed for co-occurring opioid dependence and anxiety. And the supplement is looking at gender differences and mechanisms of recovery from opioid use disorder and anxiety. And this could not be more timely to have such a supplement. And so how do folks apply SABV to research? On this slide, I'm highlighting that there's a difference between how you think about it in the research space when you're doing the research and how you think about SABV in the reporting space, where it's critical to characterize your study results for males and females, to consider the influence of sex in the interpretation of the results. But I want to highlight for you this kind of short SABV checklist that has 8 steps in just basic ways we expect people to consider SABV, all the way from considering the influence of sex when you actually select your research question and formulate your research question, to articulating a strong justification if you decide to use a single-sex study, if it's scientifically appropriate, in terms of characterizing the influence of sex in your interpretation of results, and then all the way to communicating appropriately your research findings and their generalizability, applicability, and any caveats or limitations to your research findings. These studies were done in 80-year-old, whatever, their findings are relevant to comparable populations only. So here is another little divider slide, which tells me I'm to the end of the section, where I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the resources at NIH and ORWH. It's been our privilege, excuse me, to support these continuing education modules through the Centers of Excellence on Pain Education. or COPEs. These were funded through the NIH Pain Consortium. And here's one of the modules, burning mouth syndrome and related oral facial pain. These conditions are more common in women than in men. They're seen in Sjogren syndrome, for example. Burning mouth is, and that affects 9 times more women than men. So many of the modules have embedded considerations that are highly relevant to women. Our seminar series as well, here is Jeff Mogul, incredible talk that he gave on sex differences in pain and pain pathways in a preclinical model. All of our seminar series, which were recently relaunched, are available on the videocast website for NIH. A variety of publications, as you know, are available on our website to help you understand what our thinking was. And then we recently established a new ORWH newsletter called Women's Health in Focus at NIH. And this newsletter is highlighting women's health research being done across all the different institutes and centers. We also recently updated our ORWH website so that we highlight all the institutes and centers as well as federal partners and the research that they're doing that's relevant to the health of women. And so here are some of the pieces of resources that I think are available to you and that I want to make sure you are aware of. So I covered the major topics, I hope, Vass, that you asked me to make sure that I covered, and I think we still have time for some more questions.
Yep, thank you. And actually those slides were perfect to end with because we did get a question from a registrant about specific resources that are accessible for individuals to go in and learn more about sex as a biological variable and now how to, design experiments and look at their research questions in the context of sex differences. Someone, actually, yes, thank you, Rachel, for your live question. So I'm just going to read it. So Rachel from our audience says that there's a clear need to incorporate women in research, especially during translation and clinical research, but the challenge remains on how to engage women in research in general. What advice can be given on how to get women to participate in research?
So Vass, do you think she's talking about as investigators or as volunteers and participants?
I'm guessing, Rachel, feel free to go ahead and text. I'm guessing she's actually saying like actual participants.
Okay.
Well,
that's a big issue, and I really appreciate the question. It's something that's really important to ORWH and really at the foundation of our office, because that's why we were founded, to make sure that women were included. And so one of the areas that we are working in, I co-chair a committee on inclusion, and it's called the Inclusion Governance Committee with Dr. Marie Bernard, the Deputy Director of the Aging Institute, is looking at our policies around inclusion. But on a practical level, we have on our website an inclusion outreach toolkit, which addresses this issue from the PI and study coordinator's perspective and gives strategies for recruitment and retention of women in clinical research. It gives specific case studies. So there's some examples of different things that people have done that were effective, things ranging from providing childcare at the time of the study visit, making sure that you are not, your materials that are advertising, publicizing your study are gender appropriate. The places where you place those flyers or do your social media outreach, reaching specifically out to mommy blogs or whatever is the appropriate venue, not just doing the same old thing, which is putting a flyer in a library or posting it on a single website. Being intentional about your recruitments, and then not just recruitment but retention is important. So women have additional responsibilities more commonly in this country than do men in the caregiving space. So making sure that you don't set up study visits and study windows around your visits that are just not appropriate if somebody has a lot of caregiving responsibilities. So using specific outreach strategies, attending to it in terms of your study design, making sure that you're actually not unwittingly discounting a large population of women because you have, for example, upper age limits. So that's a new issue in inclusion across the lifespan, which is a new policy that NIH is rolling out, that if you say people between 18 and 60 with whatever condition, and in fact this condition affects women 10 years after it does men, which is common for cardiovascular disease, for example, you're cutting off a whole segment of women that would be eligible participants. So we have to do our job to make sure our study designs and our processes are as inclusive as possible. But we know it's really about, getting participants in, helping them to understand. And then in terms of diverse populations of women, it's important to have diverse individuals on your study team because we know that makes a difference in terms of individuals' willingness to participate.
Awesome, thank you for that. Another question that we got with registration that I think would be valuable, maybe that you could help go over, is how does sex as a biological variable get evaluated at study section? So what are reviewers instructed to look for
Sure.
in that?
The question's at how is SABV evaluated in study section? So a study section, as you know, is a peer review judgment of everything that you're presenting. And so SABV is assessed in the same way other things are assessed. It's a scientific judgment. There is no, what do they look at first? What do they look at second? Do I have to have this? There is no cookie cutter way to address SABV because of the wide range of types of studies and investigations that people are doing, and it applies broadly. So at a first cut, I would say that male and females, explicit description of how males and females are included, addressing any specific issues that might be relevant for that scientific question around any potential known differences between males and females. For example, if we know that, cortisol levels for male, Sprague-Dawley rats who are being immunized with whatever are different at 10 a.m. versus 3 p.m. And so we know that, so we're going to do our experiments at 11 a.m. If there's something that's known about sex differences, it should be included and explicitly stated. Obviously, a design that talks about upfront how results are going to be considered, whether the results are going to be disaggregated by sex, not necessarily powered to detect sex differences, of course. We're not asking for that, but a statement about that. Attention to these details goes a long way to displaying an understanding of the SABV policy. So to summarize, there isn't one way I can tell you. First, they look and see if you have 10 males and females. Then they look at specific aim 2 and look for this. It's your whole package of your application and your research strategy that you acknowledge whatever is appropriate for your research question and what's known already, and that you are making a good case for the approach that you're taking.
Right. And so just to kind of follow up on that, again, based on some questions that we got ahead of time, is, a lot of us are interested in women's health research and questions that are specific to females. Like I have a grant that just went and looking at pregnancy effects on PTSD symptoms. Males don't get pregnant. So when coming at it from that angle, do you have any advice for us in some language that are some strategies that we can use?
Sure. It's a question about single-sex studies and SABV. So SABV does not mean you can't do single-sex studies. First of all, of course, in situations where males and females have different organs, that's totally appropriate to have prostate cancer studies, uterine cancer studies, obviously. But even in the case of pregnancy-related PTSD, do you have to have a male model of PTSD that's some other, no, you don't. You have to make the scientific case for the fact that only females get pregnant. Pregnancy causes a wide variety of hormonal changes and other issues that may be triggers or have a sex-specific pathophysiology in women. This question in and of itself is worth studying. You just have to make the scientific case for that. There's not a problem with that. Institutes make their own decisions about how many of those studies they want to do and how many studies they might want to do on prostate cancer treatment causes depression in men over 50. They have to make a portfolio level, IC level decision about how many of those studies they're going to do. And I highlight that because you can't have all sex specific studies, and we don't have that situation. That's not a problem. There's not a problem with doing sex specific studies that are scientifically justified appropriately.
Great, thank you. And with your answer, you actually tackled another question that we got. Please, audience, if you have any other live questions, please use that chat box. Just to kind of switch gears, we had a couple of questions that came in regarding how this SABV has influenced policy. And one question mean, is there any changes, good or bad, that you have seen as a result of this policy going into place?
So questions about changes that have happened after the SABV policy has been implemented. I would say the number one thing I've learned through this process is that human beings don't like change, even if it's the change they asked for. So I would say this is a substantive change in mindset. And we're moving from kind of a default mentality to research by design is what I call it, where you upfront are designing your study, including this perspective. And convention is not acceptable any longer. And so there's been resistance, I would say. Of course, there's been resistance in some sectors. And in terms of moving forward, I will say that I see promising results with attitudes that are changing, with study sections addressing these issues more consistently, with leadership in all the institutes and centers, reflecting and affirming SABV independent of me saying anything to them about it. So I would say that attitudes and leadership, wider spread recognition of SABV as important, people saying, oh, now I see why this is important. I really didn't understand that. But I do think it is one of those things that it is going to take quite a bit of time to fully infiltrate all the different disciplines and areas, because scientific disciplines are at a very different place in this conversation. So I showed you neuroscience being kind of way over here. I mean, neuroscience is kind of notorious for not addressing these issues, even though, I mean, that's pretty much one of the systems that you could very easily document relevant biological differences. And so we're moving in to try to address that in multiple disciplines by working with scientific societies and associations so that we understand better what their issues are in the context of their disciplines. We want to hear from those folks in terms of, well, in my field, biomedical imaging and bioengineering, this isn't relevant. Oh, yes, it is. Let's talk about why it is. And getting opportunities to be on a platform at their society meetings and association meetings so that there are SABV workshops all over. You know, those are some of the things that we're doing. And, you know, anytime you make a change, it's going to be, there's going to be inertia that you have to overcome to make the change. And I would say we're building momentum. We have, you know, clear support. It's a policy that's been implemented. I think exactly how the policy is applied in the context of different scientific situations is where the challenge is now.
All right, and that now kind of, we got another live question. Thank you, Catherine Burnett. Can you speak a little bit, Dr. Clayton, about SABV and how it's been applied or how it's applicable to research in behavioral and social sciences? A challenge has been applying biomedical frameworks to social settings where there are many different contexts that may be appropriate for research.
So the question is about biobehavioral research. And
how to apply SABV to biobehavioral and social sciences. Right.
So social scientists have really been at the forefront of addressing, obviously, gender, right? So they're ahead of most of the biomedical researchers in terms of recognizing that importance. That being said, this is a slightly different perspective, and it is around this biologic variable. And so at a minimum, again, male and female, so defining biologically, male and female animal subjects or people being included and being attended to, you know, they are often some of the investigators that have addressed very well, you know, ways that men and women are different. I think that our behavioral and social science colleagues have been at the forefront of some methods that are really helpful for like factorial study designs and other adaptive trial designs that help us to parse out whether there might be differences in males and females. They also help us in terms of, are you in your table 1 reporting numbers of males and females as in sex assigned at birth or karyotypically defined, or how exactly did you determine that? Or are you reporting gender identity? Are you reporting self-declared gender identity? You know, what are you reporting exactly? So they've really pushed us to make sure that people understand that whatever way it's appropriate to look at men and women, males and females, if it's intersex or transgender, if that's appropriate for the context of their research that they feel is appropriate, they should make the case for it. We're not prescriptively saying you need to do it this way, or, you know, social scientists, you need to make sure you karyotype. You know, we're not doing that. And so we're asking, because they're in the best position to tell us what's most appropriate in the context of their research question, what's known, and then their peers in the appropriate study section are in the best position to judge that justification in the context of the scientific assessments that they're doing for their entire application. So it's part and parcel of the whole thing. It's kind of not a separate add-on or make sure I check this box issue.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so.
Boss, can I ask a question?
Of course, Kelly, go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Clayton. This has been amazing. So I kind of have a related question because I too am a social and behavioral scientist, but I'm also thinking about biology in the population-based and community-based context. So I'm very interested and excited by your slides, which I think you actually called divider slides, but I thought that they were really exciting from an intersectional perspective. So I was thinking about how age and race and sex differences all intersect, and maybe how I was wondering how you've seen that paradigm and an intersectional perspective sort of evolve in this field and what it means for SABV research. Like, have you seen any good examples of it being integrated into a study design?
Great question, Kelly. We really, so they're like dividers between by section. That's one of my
Yeah.
favorite slides we made.
I love it.
So, you know, these issues, we think they're just too often not attended to, and intersectionality in general, especially from biomedical researchers, is not something that is taken up as much as it should. And so from our perspective, what we've done is our strategy is to be catalytic. And so we have developed a program, an administrative supplement called Underserved, Understudied, and Underrepresented Populations of Women. And so in that funding opportunity, can you guys still hear me?
Yep.
Okay. In that funding opportunity announcement, we talk about the fact that we are specifically looking for research that addresses intersectionality, that multiple domains. So age, race, ethnicity, cultural, rural versus urban, all of these many determinants of health are important. And we want to develop better ways, better methods to integrate them. And so I don't have an answer as in I saw this great study that is like awesome, but I can tell you we're right now reviewing applications that are awesome for this U3 program. We call it U3, Understudied, Underrepresented, Underreported Women. And it's our second year, and we increased the funding this year. So we'd love to see applications from other people like yourself and others who are really pushing us to expand that. So that's our strategy for encouraging and being catalytic in that space. But I do see increased recognition of the importance of these issues across NIH. I think that because the inclusion policy changes now require applicants to justify excluding children or older adults, the life course is one of those kind of equalizing factors that's getting all the folks that do research involving human beings to think about what that might be, how that might be important for them, which kind of opens their eyes to there might be other things other than I just need to fill these little boxes in this table. You know, I have enough of these and these and these, versus how might a 65-year-old woman who never had health insurance and is the first time she has health insurance now present to a care provider, what might be the context and how might that be important for my research question? You know, those are really interesting questions that we hope can be answered in the future.
All right, thank you for that. And just kind of follow up with that, on that with a question that we received with registration. So you just mentioned the U3 mechanism as a way to get funding to begin to look at sex differences in the previous administrative supplements, to look at sex differences. Are some of those, I mean, the U3 is still active. Are there some other mechanisms by which investigators can put in to get money to start look at sex differences in their research?
So we would love to see more funding opportunity announcements that specifically look at sex differences. I would say that they're relatively few, to be honest. NIMH has one, NIDCR has one. So there's one in Sex Differences and Resilience. I don't know if that one's still active. There's one in Sex Differences that I know is active from the Dental and Craniofacial Research Institute that covers oral facial pain, dental, it covers any of their mission areas, sex differences. They have a specific funding opportunity, right? But and then, you know, of course, our SCORE, the Specialized Centers on Research on Sex Differences, cooperative agreement is in a new form. So that's one, but that is the only center size grant that exists, funding opportunity that exists, that's disease agnostic across NIH that looks at sex differences. So what we've been doing is we've been trying to work more closely with the institutes and centers when they're developing their relevant funding opportunity announcements to encourage them to embed language around SABB and sex and gender, and especially when they are asking us to sign on to those funding opportunity announcements where we signal that we'd be interested in co-funding applications that do address these differences. And so that way we're using our co-funding money. We co-fund research that the institutes select to fund. They come and present those applications to us in a specific process where we can decide whether to co-fund them. So I want to make sure folks know that we, in addition to the BIRCWH and the SCORE and the U3 Administrative Supplement and the Sex and Gender Administrative Supplement, we also provide bridge funding, our 56 bridge funding to investigators, and we co-fund a third of our research budget goes to all the different institutes and centers, added onto their research dollars to go to investigators. And so I would say in your disease area, you need to talk to your program official and your institute to make sure that you know whether that institute has any FOAs that address sex and gender specifically. Be sure you're signed up to get the guide notices every Friday and search, you know, diligently for them. But we agreed that there's a need for more. We're hoping that with the SABB policy implementation, recognizing that it is not the same as sex differences research, that more investigators will be appropriately accounting for SABB, thereby generating more sex disaggregated data, more sex specific results that would provide the basis for better and more well-designed sex differences applications specifically that would help more sex differences research be funded. So we recognize that that's a challenge, and that's, you know, something we advocate for unfailingly at NIH with all the different institutes and centers.
All right, thank you so much. With that, I think we only have a couple minutes left. So just to kind of lighten it up, well, I don't lighten it up because this is, I think, still a serious thing for everyone in research is, as far as work-life balance and hobbies of yours, can you just share with us, you know, how you maintain work-life balance and some things you do for self-care is what we like to say.
Sure. Oh, I love it. So I can't say that I have a good work-life balance. I say we work on work-life integration, right? So, and so for me, the things, I was doing a lot of Tai Chi until my gym decided to drop Tai Chi. I'm so livid with them because there were only like 6 or 8 of us that went. And of course, it's not as popular as everything else. So I had to switch over to yoga, which is really good, and dance jam, which is really good. So I have my particular classes that I try to get to. And then honestly, you know, for me, one of my hobbies, my 2 major hobbies are tennis and art. I really love going to art museums. And so I'm really fortunate in this area that there's so many art museums that are free. So I try to take time to do that. I, like many of us, could do better at it. So I encourage us all to take better care of ourselves. One thing I do that is kind of a weird little thing, you guys might appreciate it, is that, you know, I remember feeling really embarrassed when my daughter would call me when I was in a meeting or something, and I'd be hiding my phone under here and all of this stuff. And then, you know, it's not good, right? So for meetings with me, if somebody has an emergency issue or urgent family issue, I tell all of my staff, you can step out of the meeting. It's not a problem. You can step out of the meeting to go to the ladies' room, the restroom. You can, you know, I don't want to create that environment where people feel like their life, real life, they're not like their real person when they're at work. So we really try to do that here. Everybody is working very, very hard here and in academia, of course. So there's just not enough hours in a day. I do think we all have to kind of know your own limit, right? And you're like, when your gas tank is on empty, like the light is coming on the dashboard, you know, you need to stop and take care of yourself. Hopefully you don't get there. And I can't say I've really gotten that down. I'm getting too close down there to a quarter of a tank all the time. But I think we can encourage each other. When you see somebody, you know, like, oh, let's go for a walk, or, you know, we try to do some walking meetings around our building. We could do more of them, but those are some of the little things that I try to do.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, Dr. Clayton. We really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the webinar. Just want to remind everyone that after you close out, you will receive an online evaluation for today's session. So please fill that in. Let us know what you'd like for us to address in upcoming webinars. And Kelly, I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, I just want to echo your comments and thank you, and thank Dr. Clayton for such a terrific talk today, and the audience, and to let you all know to stay tuned for information on our next leadership seminar topic and date. Information is forthcoming. So thank you all again, and enjoy your day.
Thanks, Dr. Clayton.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.